What are some of the most common legal disputes or lawsuits that come up with vacant land properties?
Depending on where you buy it, it's who has easements, who owns the property. That's going to be the greatest risk. Adverse possession of land as well. Let's say that you buy some property and the neighbor's been mowing 20 feet onto your property for the past 15 years and maintaining that one section as if there was their own. You buy that, they're going to make a claim and say, hey, that's 20 feet's mine. That may screw up your ability to build on that property because now you took a buildable lot, you just lost 20 feet, you can't build anything in that section. So that's the greatest risk right there.
Sounds like a new sub niche for land flippers is to expand your holding just by mowing your neighbor's yard a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
It can be very profitable that way.
That's hilarious. Uh, Aside from getting insurance, is there anything that you can do to avoid disputes or liability or
Just getting
lawsuits?
a survey on that particular issue, right?
Yeah, well, you get a survey, but the survey isn't going to, it's just going to show you where the boundary markers are and where the lot lines are for your property. It's not necessarily going to let you know if that property is being maintained and there's an adverse possession claim against it. So that's what you would need to do is hire someone, have someone go out there, take a look at the property and say, is there anything that is obvious to the naked eye that someone could assert that, yeah, I have 10 feet of this property because I've done X, Y, and Z. Let's say there's a fence, that somebody put up there. That could be an issue, or some type of barrier, or just a small wall for plantings. So those are the concerns that I have, or an easement. So let's assume that the neighbor's been driving across that property for the past 17 years to gain access to his backyard where he built a garage. You buy that property and you want to erect a fence and a house on there, you're going to have to contend with that easement. You're going to find him some other access because now he has the right to access his backyard across your property. So there's lots of little things like that come up. Water rights as well, depending if you had a well. Maybe they put their drain field on that property. No one knew about him.
Just to clarify, you're saying that if somebody essentially treats the property as if it's their own in some capacity for a long enough time, that they'll actually have some right or claim to that particular property?
Yeah, so this is all came about for me. That my first experience with this as a child growing up on that property where I grew up. My dad had probably about a half acre worth of land, or a little more, that he had when he bought it. It already been fenced by the previous owner, and it turns out that the fence line cut through the adjoining property owner's property. And so when that property was sold, and so this would have been probably 28 years later, this one little corner lot was sold. Maybe it's 3.5 acres. When they ran a survey, what they found is that my father's land encroached onto their land via that fence by, I don't know, 50 yards, let's assume. And they tried to want to tear my dad's fence down and say, oh no, that's our land. Like, whoa, hold on a minute. Said that fence has been there for 30 years. That's my property. I've run animals on it. That's no longer your property. And so, of course, a lawsuit came from it, and they lost. And my father kept the property, and they readjusted the legal description for his land to account for it.
Wow, interesting.
So that is a viable strategy, Seth. Like we could just
Yeah.
start mowing our neighbor's lawn, and long enough, we'll just get a bunch of property.
Wow.
Yeah, but you have to be careful on that. So my father was aware of this issue, and then where I grew up, there was a county road that cut through my parents' property. And so when he bought, he owned, up to where we had the fence, and then on the other side of this little county road, there was a house kind of sloping. My dad owned about 70 feet up that neighbor's property. And the neighbor would mow it all the time, but my father would always go over there and let him know, hey, this is my property. And so he kept him aware of the fact that he owned that property. Sometimes, he'd send my brother and I over there, and we would just, sit in a chair in the grass. He goes, I want you to sit over for a couple hours. I go, what are you doing that for? Just let him know that's our property and not his. So they couldn't assert that by mowing it, they claimed ownership. Because in order to claim ownership under adverse possession, you have to state that it's been hostile and adverse to the owner and that you took it under a claim of right. So there's certain things you have to go through. If the owner puts you aware, makes you aware of the fact that they own the property and they're aware of what you're doing, then it doesn't work.
And I'm assuming the time frame is probably specific to each state, right?
Yeah, you're typically looking at 7 or 10 years, depending on how you acquire it.